Hey everyone, Chris Carter here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're going to answer a lot of your questions on today's show with the Locked On Steelers hotline. So get into all of it, including the direction of the Steelers mimicking the Eagles. Is that the right way for the Steelers to go? That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. All right, everyone, we're back here on the show. We're going to do a full mailbag episode because we have so many calls to get through, and it is amazing how many of you guys call. We're going to get calls from all over the place here in PA and Indiana, but also North Carolina, California. It's going to be all over the place. But we were going to have Shelby Cassesi on from Channel 11. Unfortunately, she wasn't feeling well, so we got to put that back. We're going to try to have her back on again soon. So we will bring that. But as always, we want to start with our calls. We can do 4-1. You can call in at any point in time, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We'll try to get you on the show. So we start with this call, and I wanted to lead with this call. This is a very interesting one, and this one comes from Nick out in Indiana, PA. And whereas I think Nick understands what the Steelers are trying to do with their roster, he worries if they're trying to follow the Eagles a little too much or if that's the wrong philosophy to be following. Here's Nick.
Hi, Chris. This is Nick from Indiana, PA. First off, a little shout-out for Ryan Watts. I'm sorry to hear what happened to him, and I think we had maybe found something there in him. But anyway, I think the Steeler mystique has been missing from the NFL for so many years, revolving around this standard. The mystique especially went away when we lost to Baltimore the way we did. The Steelers used to be leaders in the NFL, and now they're followers. It's time to stop trying to be the Pittsburgh Eagles and be your own man and put the term Pittsburgh Steelers back in the NFL the way it used to be and not the way it is now.
So thank you, Nick, for your question. I appreciate you, as always, 412-223-6644. So, Nick, a few things. One, I do agree it'd be refreshing for the Steelers to play play the way that they're trying to play in the biggest moments and actually be one of the better teams in the NFL at the different things they're trying to do. Like, for example, running the ball. They want to be a big physical team up front on both sides of the ball. They had the top 5 defense back in 2020 and 2019. Like they were definitely one of those units, but they haven't had a lot of other things going with it to go along with that. And I think that's what you're talking about that they're missing is they haven't been that physical unit. Now, when it comes to running the ball, I don't think it's just an Eagles thing that the Steelers are trying to emulate here. The Eagles are just the example because they took Andy Weidel, who was in the Eagles front office and was a big part of their personnel work to try to assemble the drafts that they did and the personnel that they did that have put them in this window where they've been a Super Bowl threat and they're one of the best teams in the NFL. But when you look at the teams that ran the ball the best last year, a lot of them are the teams that are the teams that were the best in the NFL overall. You look at the top 3 teams in rushing yards per game. The Ravens were number 1. They were one of the top. They were a Super Bowl favorite. The Eagles were number 2. They were the Super Bowl winner. And the Commanders were the number 3 rushing team, and they were in the NFC Championship game. Also, right behind them, teams like the Buccaneers, 4th place playoff team. Packers, 5th place playoff team. Lions, 6th place playoff team. So your top 6 rushing teams in the NFL. And if you're worried about, well, the volume, the yards per game isn't it? You want to look at average per rush. Okay, number 1 still the Ravens. Number 2 is the Cardinals. That one's a bit of an anomaly, but Buccaneers still up there, tied for number 2 with them. Number 4 would be the Commanders. Number 5, the Eagles. So still, in both rushing yards per carry and rushing yards per game, the Ravens, the Commanders, and the Eagles, 3 of the better teams in the NFL last season, we're up there. And that's what the Steelers want to get back to being. And the thing is, they just have to be good at it. I agree with you that you don't want to become someone else's identity, just become someone else's identity, but you can get better at those things and make that yourself. That's what the Ravens really did when they got better. Mike Tomlin says it all the time. The Ravens bring out the best of them. They bring out the best in the Ravens. They try to be like each other. The Ravens at one point were starting to fall off, and they were like, you know what? We want to get physical. We want to get the big dogs up front that are going to dominate the line of scrimmage and win that way. And that's why for so long, them and the Steelers were the best rivalry in football. And maybe they still are. But when you look at how they played, the Ravens didn't go out and just manifest some brand new identity that no one's ever tried before. They said, you know what, that team's doing it right. Let's follow that and let's get better at that. And eventually they got as good as the Steelers. At times they were better than the Steelers. And that's what I think the Steelers are trying to do with the Eagles in this situation. It's like, look, there's not some brand new formula of a completely new style of team that no one's ever seen before that you want to create here. You want to create the form of football that you want to be, because listen, there's pass happy teams, there's run happy teams, there's teams that can balance things really well. But the Steelers know the biggest thing here right now is if you do not have a superstar quarterback in your ranks, a guy that is a top 5 bona fide elite quarterback in the NFL, the best way to win is to win by being physical up front on offense and on defense, controlling the trenches so you control the rest of the field, and having playmakers at different parts so that there's not as much weight put on the shoulders of your quarterback. That's what the Eagles did. Jalen Hurts is a quarterback that I really like. I loved him watching him in college. I like watching him in the pros. He's a lot of fun, but he's not the top tier quarterback guy. He's, I think, in that tier right below them where he's like, hey, he's pretty good to being on the rise, but he's not in the Mahomeses, the Allens, the Burrows, the Jacksons. Like that's the upper crust of the quarterback class right now in the NFL. Jalen Hurts, I don't think he's too far behind. Like he's not a bad quarterback. He's not even just an average quarterback. I think he's a very highly above average quarterback, but it's that Eagles front on both sides of the ball that just whoops a lot of butt. And there's nothing wrong with the Steelers saying, hey, we have to get back to doing those types of things, because the Steelers for a while didn't invest in their trenches because their trenches were solid. In the late through the late 2010s, you had Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, you had Javon Hargrave. You were set at D tackle. You didn't need to draft that position again for a while. On the offensive line, Pouncey, DeCastro, your whole offensive line was one of the most consistent units in the NFL. Now you can argue maybe they should have had some foresight and said, hey, Pouncey might retire. What happens if Pouncey retires early? What happens if DeCastro retires early? And we need to be prepared for that. And they weren't, but they were swinging at positions to try to complete the roster back then. And that maybe have been the misstep, going and getting Artie Burns in 2016 and Sean Davis in the same year. Maybe going for Terrell Edmonds in 2018 was a mistake, and trying to do that. If they invested some of those picks and invested it with good players into the trenches, maybe the Steelers aren't in this position. Maybe they're in a better spot. But again, I don't think it's necessarily that it's wrong for them to follow the Eagles' path. I think it's just about finding the success, because I guarantee you, if the Steelers become a 14-3 team or a Super Bowl favorite again, and they're running the ball, and heck, they're even doing tush pushes, you won't care that the Eagles were doing it too, because you'll be too busy having fun watching them win. And that to me is the ultimate thing here. They just need to get back to being a dominant team than rather being a team that's able to win certain matchups because they have certain parts of their team that's better than some other teams. They need to be one of the best teams in the NFL again, and they haven't been that for a bit. They've been one of the good teams in the NFL. You want to see them step up to being the great teams, and that's why they're investing the way they are. And listen, I don't think this full investment into the offensive defensive lines is going to be forever. It's about rebuilding those units so that you can invest in other spaces while that is a strength on your team. So thank you for your question, Nick. We got plenty of other questions to get to here, so we're going to do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. If you add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, it doubles your reach to the qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue with our episode here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, answering your calls from the Locked On Steelers call-in line. If you ever want to call, get your call and your question answered here on the show, the call-in line is 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we will do our best to get you on the show. And remember, there's a lot of y'all calling, so sometimes someone's question gets asked by someone else beforehand, so I apologize when that happens, and we try to eventually get as many as people as we can on the show before the season starts, because when the season starts, that's when it gets really crazy. But it's the off season, so we got more time to answer questions. So let's head out to our friend Noah out in North Carolina, asking about Pat Meyer, the Steelers offensive line coach. Noah, take it away.
What's up, Chris? This is Noah from North Carolina. Just got a question about Pat Meyer. How much faith should we have in him as the offensive line coach, helping develop the run game, since that is the route the Steelers want to go? Outside of 1 year with Christian McCaffrey, most of the teams he's been on haven't had top rushing attacks, and I'd argue the last couple of years the offensive line has regressed as the year went on. Appreciate it, love the show, and I look forward to hearing your response.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Noah, for your question. As always, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute so we can do that. Okay, so let's talk about a few things here when it comes to Pat Meyer. So, of course, Pat Meyer, Steelers offensive line coach, he was brought in to try to help bring on the young offensive line. They hired him in 2022. A year later, they would draft Broderick Jones. They would draft then Troy Fautanu and Zach Frazier the year after that. So I think here's the thing, to be fair with Pat Meyer. Pat Meyer was not handed a very good offensive line. He was not handed an offensive line that was ready to go. And the picks that he's been given are very young picks who haven't also fully been healthy. I even said at the end of the season, I would have been okay if the Steelers moved on from Pat Meyer. But if we're being fair to be judging how his work is as a coach, I think we all knew that Broderick Jones was a raw product coming out of college, and it was going to take time for him to ramp up to the level. Now, what will be judged of Pat Meyer, I think, is if Broderick Jones still looks undeveloped this year. Because if that happens, then you're going to have questions. Okay, Pat, you need to bring him along a little bit more. But also, guys like Troy Fautanu, who was hurt last year, can he take a step forward? Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick looked very good early in the year, and yes, they did fade late. But that happens a lot to rookies. Go back to TJ Watt's rookie season and how he started off on fire and then eventually kind of cooled off as the year progressed. And he had a couple plays here and there, but it took him, he hit that rookie wall at some point in 2017. So I say that for this offensive line, it'd be best to be fair about how they've gone, how they're developing these guys, and to be patient for it. You guys hear me all the time talk about the development of the 2010s offensive line, and how Marquise Pouncey was drafted in 2010. I think DeCastro and Gilbert were 2012, or Gilbert was 11. DeCastro was 12. And then eventually, like in 2013, when we were supposed to start to see these guys take a step forward, DeCastro literally took out Marquise Pouncey in the first game of the season when he tried to cut block somebody and hit his knee and took Pouncey out. And it was just a disaster. And people were wondering, would the Steelers offensive line ever even be good again? And then it became like arguably the best offensive line in football in 2014. And it was in that category of being either the best or a top 5 unit for probably the next 4 or 5-ish years. And that was a great run that they had. And it took time to develop them. Now, I know what somebody's probably sitting out there saying, Chris, it's because they went and they didn't sit around and just get anybody. They were able to go get a legendary Steelers offensive line coach, and they were able to get guys like Pouncey and DeCastro on the same page, and Gilbert on the same page. So I hear that, and yes, Mike Munchak was a great offensive line coach, but I wanted to I'll make sure I had my years in line. When he came in 2014 was after that year where Pouncey took out DeCastro. And yes, the Steelers offensive line success skyrocketed when Mike Munchak was there, but he inherited a 5th-year Marquise Pouncey, a third-year David DeCastro. I think it was a fourth-year Marcus Gilbert, and then like Ramon Foster. I think Kelvin Beachum were there. They were solid role pieces, but they had kind of gone through the wars already. They had gotten their war scars. They had developed it. And this is not taking anything away from Mike Munchak. He's a legendary coach and assistant, and he did a great job with the Steelers offensive line when he was in Pittsburgh. But I don't think it should be like, hey, there was a magic dust that he had that no one else has that you can never attain, and he's the only offensive line coach. Yeah, I think part of it is just needing to be in the right space in the right time. And the Steelers, since that group aged out, have not had a nucleus of offensive linemen or a group of offensive linemen that they have invested in that has been in their prime. And they've had guys like Kevin Dotson, who's doing well somewhere else, but he was a fourth-round pick, and he needed to go some of that in Pittsburgh. And I think he did go through that in Pittsburgh. They've had Kendrick Green, who didn't really work out. They've had other guys that they've tried with, Dan Moore, who just left. But they've all been late day 2, early day 3 picks at best that they've kind of been working with here, or free agent additions here and there. This Steelers group is homegrown and part of what they're trying to do moving forward. And they're trying to develop them. But again, it takes time for that to happen. I think, to be fair to Pat Meyer, let's see what they do this year. If Broderick Jones isn't taking a step forward, if Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick are looking the same as last year, and Troy Fautano doesn't look like a solid player, then okay, I think you can start to be like, okay, what's going on there? But I do think it's important to be patient, because linemen, offensive linemen or defensive linemen, sometimes it takes them longer to develop, because those positions aren't about speed and quickness and youth. They're often about being the biggest, the toughest, the strongest, and those are assets to guys that are more in the prime age of being an NFL player, less so than just being the fastest on the field or the most explosive on the field. That certainly helps. It helps to be young. I'm not saying it's just better to be old all the time on the line, but there's an old man strength factor that kicks in. Again, when you look at how Cam Hayward's career has panned out, for the Steelers. He came in, he was energetic, he had the right thing, he had right head on his shoulders, and he had a lot of things going for him. But it wasn't until like 2017 that he really took over and became this dominant force. And it took him years to be that dominant force. And I'm not saying that, it's going to take that long for these guys, but just give them time and give Pat Meyer time to being fair to him as well. We got another question on the offensive line. This one comes from Michael, all the way out in San Diego, California.
Hey, Chris, this is Michael from San Diego, California. My question for you today is, I'm not sure if I'm the only one concerned by this, but I'm a little concerned with the O-line guard. We let James Daniels walk, I think understandably, because he had that injury, and I like Mason McCormick and Isaac Samala. But Isaac Samala was out for a little bit last year, and he's getting a little bit older. I feel like we should just address that in the draft or at least free agency. Let me know what you think. Love the show. Thank you.
Thank you, as always, 412-223-6644. Michael, you're not wrong. I do think they could have addressed guard better in the offseason than they have. I mean, they really didn't address it at all. It was something that I even suggested that they do with some of my mock drafts. I was thinking, I think it was Tate something or another from Georgia. He was a really good linebacker. Tate Ratledge, was that his name? Either way, there were several guards that I was looking at as either day 2 picks or day 3 picks that I thought could have been depth players they stuffed into the offensive line and says, hey, learn behind Sayamalu or McCormick or battle with McCormick or whatever, but add to that position. So I do agree with you there. Now, I do want to point out though. James Daniels was always going to be gone. That was well reported. Alan Saunders talked about that on this show back in like August. It was very clear, maybe even before that, it was very clear going into training camp, this was going to be James Daniels' last season with the Steelers. Just plans wasn't working with what he wanted financially and what they were willing to pay him for what he was. Now, crazy thing is that injury did kind of sting because he was the Steelers' best offensive lineman when he got hurt. He was playing very consistently, and maybe that conversation changes a little bit if you get to the end of the season and he's played a whole season as your best offensive lineman, and you're looking at Isaac Sayamala like, I don't know, buddy, that guy's younger and playing better. Maybe we do want to keep him and pass you along and let Mason McCormick take your spot. But I think it was just circumstances that worked out with James Daniels. But again, I do agree. Like, I even thought, again, this year would have been a year to draft a young guard that you expected to rise up the ranks, and they could either battle with Mason McCormick or sit behind Sayamalu, because Isaac Sayamalu's in his 30s. He's not going to be around for a whole lot longer for the Steelers. So So I think that's part of the equation here. The Steelers have to do need to address the guard position, in the near future. I think right now it's fine, but I also think this could be a shift in philosophy because, as I've said several times before, when talking about the Steelers and their history, you can think of great Steelers at almost every position in the history of the franchise. And I mean, when I say great, I mean Hall of Fame level greats, especially on the offensive line, not just the whole team, but especially on the offensive line. You think of Mike Webster, Dermontti Dawson, Marquise Pouncey at center. You think of Alan Faneca, David DeCastro, all these guards that they've had. You don't think of too many tackles. I think Sammy Davis was one, or Sam Davis was in the 70s, but he was a converted tight end that played tackle. But they don't have that Jonathan Ogden, an Anthony Munoz type of guy on their roster in their history of the franchise. And I think what they're trying to do is doing what a lot of the NFL is doing, and they're prioritizing getting the tackle positions. And that's something the Steelers really haven't done a whole lot of in their time, and maybe that's a change of philosophy. If they get it right, it'll make things easier. But I think that's what they're trying to do. And so, maybe they invest a little bit less at guard because they don't want to overinvest in the offensive line entirely, and make sure that they're at least, making sure they're putting talent in different spots on the roster. But we'll see how that pans out. But I do agree with you. They could get better at guard, and they could invest more at guard right now. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we got a question from behind enemy lines, a fan that lives in the city of an AFC North opponent of the Steelers, has a question about how the Steelers need to watch out for them and other AFC North teams. We get to that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here, answering your questions. As always, call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. Let's get to this question that comes from Cody in Cincinnati, and this one kind of is about more of the standing of the AFC North. Cody, take it away.
Hey, Chris. This is Cody from Behind Enemy Lines in Cincinnati, Ohio. Hey, my question for you is, it was pretty obvious this year that the major theme for the Steelers draft was stopping the run after the Ravens playoff game last year. But I'm curious, though, as you look across the other AFC teams' drafts, do you notice any theme or strategy that they may be trying to use to exploit a perceived weakness against the Steelers this upcoming season? Love to hear your thoughts. Love the show and appreciate all you do. Thanks, Chris. Bye.
Thank you, as always, Cody. You can call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute, and we'll get your question on the show. But let's talk. Let's talk about this. So, looking across the board, early picks for a lot of these teams. The Bengals. Let's start with the Ravens. The Ravens got Malachi Starks and Mike Green. I thought those were. I thought those were spectacular first and second pick. I had both those, got first round grades on both of those guys. Getting both of them was a big win. The Bengals went and got Shamar Stewart at defensive end, the edge rusher, who's like freakishly athletic, but kind of a tweener. Like, is he an interior guy? Is he an outside guy? Kind of like the Marvin Leal, but just a lot more athletic coming out of college. And then their second round pick was linebacker Demetrius Wright. So there's that as well. And then you have the Browns. They traded back, passed on Travis Hunter to get Mason Graham at defensive tackle, and then their second round picks were Carson Schweschinger at linebacker out of UCLA and Quinshawn Judkins, the running back out of Ohio State. So you look at all those names I just threw at you. You have 3 from the Browns, 2 from the Bengals, and 1 from the Ravens. So that's 6 players in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft from the other AFC North teams, also addressing guys that are going to be playing mostly in the box. Of course, throwing Henderson in there as a running back because that's primarily what he's going to play. But a defensive tackle and a linebacker from the Browns, a defensive end and a linebacker from the Bengals, and then an edge rusher and a safety, one guy who wouldn't be there, from the Ravens. I think that they were tapping into the strengths of this draft class, and I think that that's something that the Steelers were trying to do as well. I don't think it's necessarily that they had specific plans to take out the Steelers with their draft picks. I think that they're all chasing sort of what everyone's trying to be in the NFL, which is if you have an elite quarterback, you build around an elite quarterback with the things that are most attainable, and you try to stack your roster to be the best in the NFL so you can win in different ways that your style is going for. But if you don't have that best quarterback in the NFL, you try to build around that, and then you also try to find that quarterback. And I think that's what the Browns tried to do. Mason Graham was a lot of people's top defensive tackle on their board. We'll see if that pans out. With that being a fifth overall pick there. Carson Schweschinger was a linebacker. I had in my top 100. I don't think I had him as high as 33, but he was a cover linebacker that could help there and also help against the run. And then Quinshon Judkins, one of the better running backs. I thought him and Travion Henderson. If I said Henderson, I was mistaken. It's Quinshon Judkins. But hey, Ohio State running backs, right? But Quinshon Judkins, being the physical back that he is, I think fits what they're trying to do there as well. I don't think it's specifically about the Steelers. And personally, I don't think most teams are really building their team specifically to beat the Steelers right now, because the Steelers are on top of the NFL. The Steelers are an above average team. They're a team that makes the playoffs more often than not, get loses in the playoffs right away, but beats most teams that they faced, overall. So, or more teams than they face than they don't. So that's where I think a lot of teams aren't necessarily focused on the Steelers too much, but I do think it is a bit of a rat race right now between all the teams to get to that point where they can take down the best teams in the NFL. And right now the Ravens would be in that category. Now, for example, I think the Ravens draft was more so about trying to catch the Chiefs and the Bills, because those are the two teams that are messing them up the most. And Malachi Starks, that's the guy to help cover the big thing that those two teams were exploiting. That was deep passes down the middle part of the field. Mike Green helped them get after the quarterback to stop those elite quarterbacks that they're facing. I think that's what they're doing. So actually, I think these teams aren't necessarily worrying too much about the Steelers. I mean, they're, of course, worried about the Steelers. They don't want that. They know how dangerous of a franchise they can be, and Steelers have been a thorn in all of their sides over the past ever. And the Steelers have been on top of the division. But, yeah, I don't think these drafts were. Now, I do think each team has the elements to their team that should be worrisome for the Steelers. Like, the Bengals still have Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And so long as you have that three-headed monster on offense, that's a problem. And the Steelers, cornerback situation needs to take a step up. Joey Porter Jr., as we talked about earlier this week, needs to take a step up. They need to see that there. If the Steelers get better cornerback play, maybe that becomes less of a weakness than when they face that team. The Ravens, like you said, they ran over the Steelers. That was the impetus for the Steelers making a lot of moves that they made in this offseason to strengthen their run defense. The Browns, I mean, it's tough to say the Browns are the impetus of much there, outside of you want tackles to be able to stop Myles Garrett, and they've drafted those two in the first two in the last two first rounds before this year. So maybe that you kind of say that the Browns really don't have an identity. I think it scares the Steelers too much outside of that, unless you worry about them running the ball. But again, I don't think it's necessarily about the Browns. It's more so about the Steelers wanting to be this identity and to be this style of team. Now, here's the thing: if the Steelers end up developing, like, this becomes a good year for the Steelers where they develop a better offensive line, the defense gets better at stopping the run, and they have that physical identity on both sides of the ball, and it really does look like they're just a quarterback away from being a serious Super Bowl threat, then I do think teams will be like, oh, wait a second. We cannot allow them to return. We cannot allow them to be in the top tier. That's when that day will happen. But I don't think right now, no, Cody, I don't think any of the AFC North teams are necessarily drafting specifically to stop the Steelers at this point in time. But those were all our questions for today. We still got plenty of more that we could get, that we'll be getting through. We'll get to them as we roll throughout these next week. Remember, OTA starts next week. We'll be back with there. We'll try to talk with Dan Horner for tomorrow's episode. So tune in for the next Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the same handle, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. You can read my work in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. You can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here tomorrow with more on the Pittsburgh Steelers, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.